Welcome to this video. My name is Christopher Webber and I'm the author of Mountains Mishaps. Today I'm going to be talking about environmental change in the Blue Mountains and how it will affect bushwalkers, visitors and locals alike. In writing the book, I realised it was no good just talking about current threats, but also how things might change in the future. And that, of course, includes climate change, especially as it applies to bushwalkers. And you'll quite often see graphics like this one, where it's said that there will be an increasing number of hot days and heat waves, an increasing number of severe fire weather days, and a longer bushfire season. There will be an increasing number of severe rain events, a decreasing average annual rainfall, particularly in spring and winter, and decreasing snowfall. So I wanted to find out if there was evidence of any of this happening already, or if it had happened in the past. And I also found some other things that were happening, and these are all included in the book. Let's talk about the increase in hot weather days and heat waves. When I moved to the Blue Mountains more than 20 years ago, it was thought unnecessary to have an air conditioner, and days when it was 41 degrees were virtually unheard of. But now they're reasonably common, in the height of summer at least. And also, it doesn't cool down as much at night as it used to. These are more sort of anecdotal information, but we have here also a heat map that shows that they are expecting that any increase in temperatures will not be evenly distributed, but will be, for instance, more likely to occur in the Katoomba area. This will have other implications, of course, and that is that there will be an increased fire risk, and also that amongst visitors there might be an increasing number of cases of hypothermia and hyponatremia. Heat exhaustion is not a common reason for a rescue because most people who recognise that they have it and self-rescue. However, there are some extraordinary stories of people who had difficulty finding water, such as the one where they had to lick the water off the bark of trees early in the morning. The most famous case of hypothermia and dehydration is that of David Iredale in December 2006. He tried to walk across Mount Solitary, and his guidebook said there was water on top of the mountain, but there wasn't any. So he ran out of water because it was quite hot. And he was the fittest of the group, so he went ahead of the others and took a wrong turning somewhere and unfortunately died before he could reach any water. Hyponatremia is very similar to hypothermia, so it may get confused. And maybe that's one reason why it's so barely mentioned. I only found one case, but it could be that because it's a medical condition, it's not reported very often. The main thing is that if you see somebody on social media suggesting that you drink lots of water very quickly, like so many litres per hour or something, please ignore them. The amount of water you drink is related to your body weight and to what your conditions are at that time. And hyponatremia can kill you. With the increasing number of severe fire days and the longer bushfire season, this has several implications, obviously. But some of them are not so obvious, I suppose. So for one of those, for instance, is that national parks now closes the national park if there's a risk of a bushfire rather than there is actually one burning. In the past, they might not have done that. And that actually caused some deaths. So, for instance, at Perry's Lookdown, you can see a monument to 4 boys who died there in 1957 in a bushfire. But did you know that in 1982, an American person also died and his body was found next to that same monument? 2 Swedish tourists also nearly died, but they saved themselves by hiding in a cave. But the other thing that can happen is that the fires themselves may cause problems afterwards. So, for instance, in 2020, a canyoner was exiting a canyon, and he had put down a rope, and he was expecting to put his rope around a tree, but the tree had been burnt in a bushfire. So he had to extend the rope further back, and when he got to the bottom of the rope, it didn't reach the bottom of the ground, and he just let go of it. And unfortunately, the police rescue and ambulance were unable to revive him later. Next, we have the increasing number of severe rain events. And the first graph I have here is drawn from data sold to me by the BOM. And it shows the number of days each year that there are 25 millimeters of rain or more. This shows a big spike in 1950 and then 2020, I think it was. And also a spike every 15 years or so. And the red dotted line shows a slight increase over time, but that might not be significant. So let's have a look at the next graph, because this one is a bit more decisive. It shows that there are some very heavy days of rain that are mostly in the last few decades. The early part of the century, there's very few of them, and then suddenly later in the time we have more very heavy days, and these are days of 200 millimeters or more. So that's exactly what was predicted, and it is happening in the Blue Mountains. And these are the days when we have some terrific storms that cause huge amounts of destruction. This also leads to possibly more cases of hypothermia because people will be caught in the floods. The main point I would like to make about the floods is that they are getting worse. So that in 1967, a group of bushwalkers who were riding up the Cox's River saw a wall of water come down on them, and it swept away their campsite. And Una Kennedy, who was sort of their leader and a very good swimmer, jumped into the water to try and get to the other side, but she drowned. But the flood peaked at 5.7 meters, whereas recently, in 2021, there was a flood that peaked at 7.5 meters. And I'll show you in a minute the graph that shows that they are all rising. Here I've graphed the Coros, Cox's and Nepean rivers using data mainly from the Sydney Catchment Authority, and they all show the same basic trend, which is an increase in the peak flood levels and a decrease in the average water levels in the rivers. And this can be attributed not only to climate change, but also to things like covering trees and grass with concrete and bitumen, and the increase in number of feral animals and a reduction in the diversity in the ecosystem. Because the greater the diversity of the ecosystem, the more water it stores rather than just letting it run off. The last item on our list of changes, although not the last item I have, is the snowfalls. So snowfalls are decreasing, and in the upper Blue Mountains they have decreased to the point where there have now not been any significant snow for 3 years. And it used to snow every year for even if only for a few days at a time. And the last significant snowfall was 2015, and that's when we had to close down Katoomba because nobody could get anywhere. The snow was so bad in the beginning of the last century, in 1900, that 2 men died possum trapping in the Grose Valley because they couldn't get out. And also 2 people died in Katoomba because the Katoomba Falls froze and they wanted to pull icicles off the falls and they fell off when they tried to do that. There are 2 other items on the list of climate changes that I haven't mentioned so far, and they are the introduction of new species and also the effect on the rocks. The species being introduced can be quite obvious, like European wasps, which normally die off during the winter, but without a proper winter, who knows what's going to happen to them. But others, like the chiggers, are microscopic, and they are the larval stage of red mites. They are normally found in moist, warm areas, and it may be that there have been an increased number of reports of them because the Blue Mountains is warming up. And we'll see. Another thing that's happened is the post-bushfire regrowth, which may also be attributed to some extent to climate change. We've had 1 man nearly die of thirst because he couldn't get to the Cox's River because of the thickness of the regrowth. And we had 2 other men that had to be rescued because they didn't take as long as they expected to walk along the Cox's River. And this is a major point with climate change, is that if you are a bushwalker or somebody who likes the outdoors, you should not be expecting things to be exactly the same as they always were. That in fact you should expect things to be different. As I mentioned before, there was the poor man who found that his rope didn't reach the ground because the tree had been burnt down. That's another example. But there are probably many others. Lastly, I should like to talk about the effects of all these changes on the local rocks. Because it's sandstone, it soaks up water and can become quite brittle, which means that being on the cliff edge would be quite dangerous. However, a portion of the rock is made from ironstone, which is stronger, so you may be on a patch of safe zone, which you step off and suddenly find that it collapses under you. The main point, though, is that all this water soaking up the rock is causing cliff collapses, and there have been some quite spectacular ones recently. And also they have been blocking roads, such as the Victoria Pass and Bell's Line of Road and Walgan Gap and the Geological Caves Road. And some of these have been closed for years. So there have been major effects of climate change in that sense. A possible future effect is the Lapston syncline, which, if it could produce an earthquake of significant proportions. Up until now, we've only had very minor tremors in the Blue Mountains, although they've been fairly frequent. It hasn't caused any damage. That's all I've got for you now. If you'd like to read some more great stories, get my book, Mountains Mishaps, Death and Misadventure in the Blue Mountains of New South Wales. It's $55 or $35 for emergency service volunteers. And I'll deliver it to you free if you live in the Blue Mountains local government area between Glenbrook and Mount Victoria.